Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters. To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces. We hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to this edition of Diverse Talk Matters. I'm Tasha, founder director of Diverse Matters, and I have a wonderful guest here, Elise St Palmer, who's going to be talking to us about all things moving from EEDI, so equality, equity, diversity, inclusion, to anti-oppression. Welcome, Elise.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No problem. And Elise and I knew each other from, we did some work and supported Elise with some training where she was working at Possible. And you did a range of deliveries and to make sure that your staff were enhanced and knowledgeable to deal with actually oppression. Even though it wasn't called anti-oppression, it was around making sure they were equipped to support, the service users and the work that you do. Now, when I said to you, would you want to do a podcast? And you said, yeah. I said, what should we do one about? And you said, you know what, let's do one on moving from EEDI to anti-oppression. I thought, great. Now, the title is because you did this as part of your work at Possible. A lot of people will say, we've got an EDI strategy, or we've got an organisation, and you decided to go further than that. And you call, your actual strategy at Possible is called, it's an anti-oppression strategy. So tell me a little bit of background why you wanted to do that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we always set out to be anti-oppressive from the beginning. And you'll see in the report that we wrote, we had very good intentions and we did a lot of work that we thought was anti-oppression. But it was actually after 2 or 3 years of reflection, we realised, wait, this isn't true anti-oppression work. It's like definitely progressive EDI. And it was definitely like interpersonal oppression was focusing on, but we really realized that to do truly anti-oppressive work, we had to change our direction and the things we were doing. We started focusing on anti-oppression, back in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, and the subsequent acceleration of Black Lives Matter movement. Like other organizations, we just knew we had to do more. I think like a lot of organizations at the time, we thought we were doing everything. And then it was a real stark, wow, actually, there's so much more. We need to get started with this. So that's when, our trustees approved the spend and the time for the organisation to work on becoming anti-oppressive. We got external consultants in, and we had training with yourselves to get everyone's knowledge up to speed. Yeah, wrote the strategy. So it's been a bit of an interesting journey, starting out anti-oppressive, realising we still had a long way to go, and then now we're sort of on that journey to really being anti-oppressive.
Brilliant. And if somebody out there, because some people might go, what is anti-oppression? What do you mean by that? Isn't EEDI good enough? Can you let people know why you did that move and what it actually means?
Yeah, I'll try and explain this, but it's a real simple version. So I definitely recommend people do their own research. But so my understanding of it is that EDI approaches are sort of like that saying, when it's like putting a plaster on a broken leg kind of thing. It's like, it's not getting to the root of the problem. And by all means, EDI is important. I don't want to knock it, we should have diverse teams and be working with diverse audiences. We should have inclusion and people should feel like they belong. They should feel safe at work. We should have equality and equity. All of that 100% is important. But I think the anti-oppression framework is saying that, I think with EDI, it's sort of saying you're accepting that is the system we work in. And it's like, okay, what can we do as an organization to make people feel a bit better when they're with us? And I think with anti-oppression, it's really saying, we have systematic oppression like racism or transphobia, homophobia, and you're really naming it and calling it out. And then as an organization, you're looking at where, oppression shows up for you. Have you heard of the 4 eyes of oppression? I think that's a really good way to explain it. This is what we were taught basically. We worked with the Social Justice Collective who did loads of training. So we had our first year of training with you, which is amazing, like I said, to get us up to speed with different marginalised groups. And then we had training on anti-oppression and power and privilege. And the 4 eyes of the four eyes of oppression, you sort of have to imagine the iceberg. So, you know, there's four levels to the iceberg. You've got two underwater. They're so deep rooted, you can't really see them. And that is ideological oppression, which is the idea that there is a dominant group who are, you know, like more intelligent and more deserving, more trusting. And then there's a less dominant group. So if you're using race as an example, you know, say like white people would be the dominant group, and then people of color would be the less dominant group. So it's sort of, that's those ideas and beliefs that are everywhere that sort of says that there are these different groups. And then you've got what's next? You've got institutional oppression. So that is when your institutions then are using those beliefs, whether it's like in the policing system, housing, education, and it's saying that some dominant groups deserve to have, you know, more because they're more deserving, and you know they yeah. And then there's the interpersonal oppression, which is then, so all of that, the beliefs, the institutions, then people, it gives them permission to then, you know, think they might be better than someone else and therefore treat someone, you know, poorly because they believe they're better than someone else. And then lastly is the internalized oppression, which is when, you know, people from the less dominant group start to sort of internalize those beliefs and ideologies. So that's just a really, really simple description. But for me and for my organization, that was really the changing point in understanding oppression and how it's different to some of the EEDI work we've done. Yeah, and really looking at like our own organization and seeing, okay, what are our institutional oppression? How does that show up? Yeah, it's been a really, really good journey. And I just want to say as well, like, we're still on the journey. We're not perfect. You know, like, we've made our mistakes. We have our challenges, but we just got to a point where we're like, you know what, like, as a climate organization, we really want to share some of the work we've been doing. So.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think and I think some people might go, oh, wow, this is deep. But by going to anti-oppression, you're basically getting to the nub of it. You're getting down to, you know, I think we would all agree, or most of us would agree, people who are focused or interested in EDI would say, structurally, like you said, the systems that are in place disadvantage different people, you know, whether it's within policy, you know, government, whatever. The structures are there that other people, whether it, like you said, whether it's because of race, gender, you are disadvantaged, you have less opportunities, things perpetuate and don't change. So for people out there going, oh, this, because I know some people might go, oh my gosh, you know, and only be just looking at, like you say, EEDI is important, but to make change, you need to get to, okay, what, and I love the fact that you said possible, what are we doing as an institution? Because sometimes organisations might not realise institutional practices, whether it's race, gender, LGBT plus, they might not even realise that they're in place because it's been going on and on for eternity, and nobody stood back and going, okay, what are we doing that's actually embedding the oppression and embedding those things? What can you do to break that up? And sometimes in our training, we talk about breaking that cycle of oppression. You know, we talk about whether it, you know, stereotyping and prejudice, and, you know, and oppression, and how you can break that down, because you need to, as an organisation, how can you penetrate that cycle of oppression? Whether it's with, like you started with education, whether it's giving people a voice, you know, whether it's, you know, all those sort of things, you need to make sure you challenge is one. I mean, that's a big thing, isn't it, that people need to do? One, educate yourself and challenge. So I think it's so good that you decided to do this topic, because this will get to the heart of it. And, you know, I will definitely, I thought when you said that, I thought, yeah, I'm going to definitely encourage more people. We do talk about anti-oppression, but actually it probably, and all people probably need to talk about it a little bit more, because until you dismantle those systems and do your part, nothing is going to change, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, it's accepting that there are some things you just can't change. Like you can't change society, you know. And I think it's, as an org, it's just like accepting, like, okay, what can we change? Well, we can change ourselves. And if that's the only power you have, actually, it can make a huge impact on people's lives, because we spend a lot of time at work. You know, we're a climate organisation. We do climate action. We inspire people to take climate action. That's sort of our remit. So we want to work with everyone, you know, in the country. So it's sort of saying, you know, to do that, we do need to be diverse, and people do need to belong. But also we don't want to perpetuate those, the structural oppression that's in place. And yeah, about it being deep, yeah, definitely. I mean, it is hard. Like, you have to, as an organization, and obviously organizations are made up of individuals, right? So as individuals, the work is hard. You have to have those uncomfortable conversations. You have to look inward. You have to look at like how your power shows up as an individual and as an individual in the organization. You know, it's looking at like intersectional frameworks as well, because obviously we all have different, we have different identities, and some people have different levels of marginalization, different access to power and privilege. You can have both. So it's all about having those open chats. And I think, creating that really safe space that, people can have those conversations without being defensive. And if you're defensive, well, then reflect on that. It's just like, it's always learning and growing. Yeah.
And what sort of things have you done then? So how long is your anti-oppression sort of strategy in place? And if, anybody listening or watching thinking, what actions could you said you started, you weren't, you started from the beginning in a way, didn't you? So what could organisations do? What advice would you give people to move from that into that anti-oppression mode?
Yeah, I think for us, what was key is that we worked with external consultants. So we had 2 people that interviewed each member of the team. So obviously it depends, just for reference, our organisation is around 20. So we were able to do that, but it might look different for different organisations. But basically they interviewed each member. They had their set questions to ask. And from that, they were able to collate the data and then sort of make recommendations to leadership. And that was really useful because it's so hard to look. I mean, you do have to look inward at some point with the journey, but it really helped just having external people come in and just, ask the questions and didn't have to worry about hurting anyone, or you felt safe because you weren't sharing it with your boss or whatever it is, although all those things, we do have a safe environment for that. But as we know, if you're from someone with lived experience, we mostly have had negative experiences with that kind of thing. So I'd say that was really key. And then with those recommendations, we created a working group. And that's made up of people across the organisations, different levels, different diversity, and trustees and the external consultants. And then we all worked on the strategy together. And then the whole team fed into it as well. So I think that was the key for us. And again, we had the right organisational size to do that. But I'm sure there are different ways, if you're bigger. But it felt like something we all owned and we was all part of. And then that strategy, the first one in 2020, I think that was 2021, sorry, that focused on culture and structure. So that really just focused, it was inward looking in a way. Yeah. So it's very much about, how is our structure? How is it how is it harmful? Our culture, what are we missing? What can we do better? So we spent the next year and a half really working through lots of different items. So some of the things we did was creating inclusive and progressive policies. So we have loads of different policies, but some of the key things that I'm proud of that to come from that are things like paid time off for gender affirming care, and paid time off for things like periods, menopause, fertility treatment. We have carers leave, which is up to a week that any carer, so if you're caring for children, elderly parent, a partner, you can take up to a week paid time off to do that. And it's done in a way where you can take an hour here, an hour there, because we know that's how caring can happen. It's not always blocks of time if things come up. We also do things like paid volunteer leave, paid study leave to suit the different types of people that have different needs and different areas, different places in their life. And then we have a family policy that is gender neutral, trans inclusive, and it celebrates all ways of starting a family or welcoming a child to the family. If you're adopting, fostering, surrogacy, if you're a same-sex couple. So I think that was key because that really set the tone. And we also included the team in creating those. So I would meet with the team and hear their concerns and their challenges. And then I would try and include those into the policy. And then, and then they would feed into that. So I think, I don't know, I love policies. I know it takes more than policies, but I think it's a good starting point just as an organization to say, look, this is where we're starting at. And I think it sets the tone. And then everyone can follow that. Some other things we did is we supported the team to set up a formalised union, which might seem a bit unusual for to encourage that, but we felt it was a really good way of challenging power at possible. So with the union now, we have really clear ways of making change, and that's with consultation with them or negotiation. And that has just massively changed how power dynamics at possible, and whose voices are heard. And we've got caucus spaces as well. So we have a working class one or a marginalised genders one, so people can then share their experiences and also feed into the union, which then feeds into the organisation. So that was a good way. Recently, we've set up a power and decision-making working group. So that is to sort of really explore how power shows up at Possible and how we can do it better. So we know there is hierarchy. That's how we're set up. We have the directors, trustees, we have more junior members of staff, but we just want to be looking at how does power come across and whose voices are heard, and just checking on that with the team. Yeah, so we've just done loads of things. Inclusive recruitment. We reviewed all of our recruitment. We've done things like diversity census to see where we're at and like where we need to improve in terms of diversity in the team. And yeah, I just recommend reading the report. It's all in there. But yeah, I've just done loads and loads of stuff, loads of training, loads of unlearning, loads of reflection.
I'm loving that you've got a power decision working group. I love that. And so obviously it's possible. I know it's, this might be harder, like you've alluded to earlier about if you had a larger organisation, these things might be harder to implement and embed. But you must have had leadership, must have been on board. So is it something that, obviously, are there leaders on this group, and, what sort of things get taken to there? I mean, I think that is how you get things done.
Yeah, massively agree. And that, I didn't say at the beginning, but my role is head of operations and people. And when I joined Possible, that's when I joined as and took this on when I joined. So before that, I didn't really have experience in this. So I very much learned on the job. And my biggest learning, this is probably obvious to people doing this for years, but my biggest learning is you need leadership on board. Like it's like key. It's just so key. And I've been very fortunate at Possible that they were on board. They were in the working group, the first working group. They were pushing us through with the trustee to get, the resources like time and money to spend on this. They're also in the different working groups we have. And then I think I went further in the second, our most current strategy, in really embedding that accountability. Anti-oppression is in all of our job descriptions, but it's in a much more detailed way in our leadership and senior managers JDs. I also brought in, so we have SMART objectives that we achieve every year as individuals, and anyone in a director or senior management team, they have an anti-oppression action as part of their SMART objectives. So they're actively working towards it. Also, when I created the first strategy, was very much, I did a lot of the delivery, and that's fine because it's sat very internally. But whereas the second strategy, I've designed it in a way that each function leads, whether that's comms, campaigns, fundraising, each director, they have their names against different items in the strategy. And that has been key because now the comms team are like doing, lots of anti-oppressive actions within their remit. The fundraising team are, the directors are. And I think that has been key for me, is actually putting their names to items.
Mm.
And also they're just very involved. They've come to every training we've had. They're there. They're very much championing. I can't say that word. They're very much like advocating for this. But what I would say, the biggest challenge is really time and capacity. It's always a tension there, really. So I appreciate it's very hard for leadership sometimes to have the time. But when they do make the time, it's very, very, very good.
Yeah. And I would just say out there, if there's anybody there within an organisation who, is thinking that that's the sort of way we should go, even if you've not got all leadership on board, as long as you, one at a time, just talk to leadership, talk to senior managers and go, look, to drive, our inclusions and culture processes and strategies further, we need to think there needs to be a layer, an anti-oppression focus. And I think once people understand what anti-oppression means, because some people would think that it's a negative connotation, oh my gosh, it's not blaming anyone, it is what it is. This is the structure that we're in society. So it's just about a way of, what we said earlier, dismantling that. So some people out there might go, oh gosh, they might think it's a bit too much. But if you explain what you mean by anti-oppression, it's all about just breaking that cycle, breaking the structure so that we talk about a lot in all our training, what actions. It's all about actionable work. That's all it is, really, not all, but it's really about, if you really want to make a difference, it's about what those actions you're taking to change that structure. And like you say, some things can't be changed, but there's a lot about cultural changes that you absolutely can make, no matter what size, what type of organisation you are. You mentioned a little bit earlier on about anti-oppression. I think most, because of, you said, since George Floyd, and, luckily there's been a lot more awareness about oppression since the awful murder of George Floyd. And people probably have that understanding around race about oppression. Are you able to explain a little bit about oppression in other areas, whether it's sexual orientation or gender? Because people might not go, oh, what do you mean by that? I think in race, people understand. You're able to sort of share a little bit about how anti-oppression might affect other groups and communities and individuals.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, yeah, it's a good question about language and how we understand what it really means. And I think for me, like anti-oppression, it really, you're naming things like, yeah, racism or white supremacy, but also like homophobia, transphobia, ableism, classism, yeah, and just any type of discrimination like that, I guess. It's like, yeah, and also we touched on it earlier about intersectionality as well, so that you could be someone who has multiple marginalized identities. And I think anti-oppression really, yeah, I think it's about looking at different groups of people and the oppression they face, but also knowing that they all have very similar experience, very different examples of oppression, but I think the outcomes are very similar in the sense that like it can lead to internalized oppression, which is someone we've probably both experienced that it's awful, and the outcomes and things aren't good. So I think that's why it's good to name it and call it what it is, and then I think it helps people to really understand it as well. So I think it's good to focus on different types of oppression. But I still think, anti-racism, I feel like it's still at the heart of anti-oppression, just because we do live in like a supremacist kind of society, like it's just the sort of the answer to everything, that's.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'd say so. If you're so great, I think anti-racist people have got a greater understanding, but this isn't a hierarchy. Sometimes people are like, why are you addressing this issue? So, when you're doing your work around, anti-oppression, do look at all aspects of like you mentioned, if you're discriminated or oppressed because of gender, sex, because of your gender identity, your sexual orientation, don't, do all of it. Look at how you can remove those barriers for all, because as we know, sadly, all you need to do is look on. I mean, I don't know why I do it to myself, Elise. I go on social media and I just think, why have I done that? Because all you need to do is go on there sometimes and you see something that's focused on inclusion or anti-oppression and the amount of negative perception out. So this is why this work needs to be done, because if we don't talk more about anti-oppression and we don't talk about breaking that and, taking real actions, then things won't change. And that's why, you have to keep doing it, because sadly, when somebody is talking about it, people don't get it. And I always talk about, people don't, if you've not lived that experience, people don't understand it at all. And they think that people have got an issue because they're raising it, but it's because it's their real life. This is something that people are experiencing on a day to day. And you mentioned intersectionality, and we've actually got a separate podcast on that as well. And like you said, it's really important that you look at people who have got multi-identities that may impact on their oppression. You might have multi-layers of oppression, and discrimination, because whether it's because you're black and you're gay or disabled and, gay or whatever, or come from a low socioeconomic group. Is there anything that you've done around specifically intersectionality that's worth sharing with us, or anything around it that actually you haven't said already?
I'm not sure. What came to mind is some research I did on workplace barriers for different groups. Just sort of going back to not just focusing on race, although race is very important to focus on. So what I did is some desktop research, and I did take out I looked at each group basically in the workplace barriers and educational barriers that they face. And that was like really, really interesting, because I think sometimes, we started to use at the time we started to use the language anti-oppression and we understood it, but it was like, we started saying things like, barriers and structural barriers. And it's like, it wasn't quite concrete. So I think having done this research, and it's very concrete what barriers like different groups face. And then I presented that to the team and did a workshop with the team. And I think it really showed, I think it gave people that aren't from those groups a real understanding of what the barriers are, because it's a bit vague, a bit ambiguous. And then I think we talked about intersectionality in that as well. So you could have like two of these and all those barriers you could face as well. So I think it is just about understanding, and it's also not on the people that have that lived experience to do the explaining. So I do think it's for people that, to do the learning themselves. And, I understand the comment about social media, because I was obviously social media for like 2 years. For that reason, I just the comment section, it was just so horrible. And I'm really not an expert on this. Like I said, I've only been doing this for 4 years, but my feeling is that society's sort of stuck in the interpersonal oppression, where it's like the name calling, it's the blaming, it's the thinking you're better than a different group. And I think we're not really understanding these are systems, these are structures, these are like insidious, they're everywhere, and they have been for a really, 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 really long time. And I think, I guess, I know, so I'm trying to see from the other point of view, maybe they're scared they're going to lose something. But from my experience of doing this work at Possible, there's just so much to gain. And we have we're not a perfect organization by no means, but I know the team really appreciate this work. And that's the feedback we get at time again. And that's, everyone on the team, not just those that have lived experience, it's other members that have lots of privilege, they appreciate this work and they feel like I can do these actions. It's like doable within the space that we have.
Yeah, brilliant. And actually sort of answer the next question in a way, because my next question was going to be about actions, you said, and I always probably mention this probably too much in a lot of podcasts, because I see it too often, sadly, where there's that performative allyship. Yes, we believe in addressing inclusion, but really and truly, they're not putting the actions in place. And it's just, it's not authentic and it's not really done. Anything else that you have not mentioned so far in terms of moving to that, meaningful action to dismantle oppression?
Yeah, I think allyship is quite it can be performative, whereas I think meaningful action is usually very inward, actually. It's having that really uncomfortable, like, self-reflection on things you might have done, like thoughts you've had, assumptions, stereotypes. And I think it's in the day-to-day, it's in the small moments day-to-day, like how you're operating, what you're thinking, what your biases are. And I think as an organization, it's about having uncomfortable conversations, whether that's as a board, leadership, as a whole team, about the organization's part in that structural oppression, racism, classism, whatever it is having that conversation and pointing out, when you see it, challenging when you see it, especially with someone who's more privileged and you have the energy, pointing it out. Yeah, it is hard. It does take time. But I think once the anti-oppressive practices are more embedded, my favorite part of this role is when I hear people talking about oppression unprompted and they're just explaining it or talking about it when they're challenging things. And, like we have one of the things I set up from that workplace barriers research I did, and was a policy called, or initiative called the Support and Development Boost Fund. And that's basically because what was very clear from that research I did is that people who face depression are more likely to have a support and development gap. So whether they've moved around a lot, so they haven't had consistent education, they have had a lack of role models from people that look like them or they can relate to, lack of finances to do unpaid internships, or to, there's loads and loads of barriers. So what we did is create a special fund for people that, people of colour, people from a working class background, disabled people who could basically access additional learning and training fund on top of what we already do as an organization. That's been amazing. So we've been able to offer things like contribution to therapy, financial advisor, coaching, careers advice, all of these things we've been able to offer because those people have missed out on things like that. And that's been great. But what I've also loved is that the team that can't access that have understood why it's needed and they haven't complained. And I think that is things like that. It's not seeing it as like, well, why are they getting something and I'm not? It's understanding, what? Actually, I haven't faced those same barriers. So I understand why this group needs it.
Yes. And it's bringing people along with you, isn't it? In everything you're doing. And I would say to anyone out there who was thinking, what, I do want to delve more into moving forward anti-oppression. It's bringing a lot of people with you. So the education, the communication is key. Don't go in there going, right, we're going to now be an anti-oppressive organisation and get on with it. It's about getting people, you've got to get people to understand how it's going to make everyone better. So, those going to be out there, please get the comms, get people on board, because that, like you said, you did it in a way where you spoke to everybody, and people are on board then, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. You have to bring everyone on board. Communication is so key. And also, just like we said, really, like at the beginning, it is slowly, it's gently, it's like, and it shouldn't be, to be honest, right? And it's times where it's tempting. You sort of go in and be like, ugh. But it's just not. It's not the way organizations probably work anyway. You want people on board, you want people to really understand it. And I think once you really understand oppression, that's what I was saying earlier, once we had that training about anti-oppression, really understood it at its core, it was like, you can't deny that. Like, you can't, if anything, it does motivate you to want to do more. And I've been very lucky that I've had that opportunity at Possible, and it has been, I know, and I speak to lots of people that do this work, I know it's not always straightforward. I know it can be really difficult. So I really feel for, it can be difficult.
No, definitely. It's all anything to do with whether it's inclusion, anti-oppression, any equity. It's not an overnight job, and it's not over. It's an ongoing process to see, okay, we've done this. Where are the gaps? What do we need to next? Because societally, there's always going to be challenges. So there's always going to be things to do. So, nobody's going to say, I've sorted it, I've got it. It's going to be an ongoing process. Are there any other gaps? Are there any barriers? What can I do to remove those barriers? Okay. Have you done any work with any sort of, engagement with marginalised communities? As we know, the people from underrepresented groups, marginalised communities, people, the community we've talked about already, are those that that it'd be really useful to talk to get this moving forward. So what work did you do around, whether it's internally or externally, to, develop sort of any sort of anti-oppression work?
Yeah. So, like I said, the first year and a half or so was really internally focused. And I think that was right on reflection, because we don't want to go out and sort of, we have to work on ourselves. We have to look inwards as an organisation, as individuals. In our next strategy, our current one, it was one of our main focuses was on external facing work. So our campaigns, we're a campaigning organisation. So our team, our campaigners have done lots of things to work with communities, and there's that, the power with, power to, that sort of framework. It's very much power with, which is where you're collaborating, you're sharing power. It's based on trust and respect, and you're working together. It's not like white saviorism. It's not like we know everything, we're going to tell you what you need in your community. We've had projects like Clean Cars for Carers, which it's not my project, so I hope I do this justice when I explain this one. But that was my colleague Izzy, who worked with carers in the community, because as her research shows, they're more likely to face in-work poverty. They have to use their own petrol to go and care in the community, and that fuel prices have increased. Sorry. So her remit was to work with those groups, or that group, and to find out what their concerns are, and their views on climate change. And I think they're a group that we don't always see in the media talking about climate change. There might be an assumption that they don't care, but the focus group showed they really do care. So she did lots of really great things there, like people were paid for their time. So when they attended different things, they were paid for their time. They were offered things like childcare expenses, travel expenses, and we used our power to platform their voices. So they got pieces in like The Guardian and The Mirror. So that was our way that we worked. I mean, I think the report of that is on our website as well. But that's a way that we really used our values and our sort of anti-oppression framework to think about, okay, how can we work with people that are, struggling and do care about climate change, and how can we, certain links to our vision, and then really platform and work with them. Yeah.
Now, we would love everybody to be on board, and we talked earlier about leadership on board. We'd love everybody to get it, to understand it, but we know society, people are people. So if you were, everybody seems quite really, quite on board and positive about it, your organisation, your current organisation. How would you address individuals or organisations who were resistant and didn't want to address anti-oppression work?
I mean, I guess this is to the CEOs and the leadership, but my question would be, what are you afraid of? Yeah. What are you afraid of? And I don't mean that to be defiant, or maybe a little bit, but
that's
what I mean is what are you afraid of? Really ask that question to yourself. Is it you're afraid of losing a bit of power? Are you afraid of having those uncomfortable conversations? Are you afraid of what might come from that? Are you afraid of getting it wrong? Are you afraid of saying the wrong thing? And I'd really encourage leadership to have that internal reflection. Are you worried you don't know enough? Are you worried it'll take too much time? Really, really reflect. Because when you work in this field, it's like a no-brainer, but I just really feel like once you know about these systems of oppression and like how people, it's just wrong. And we can't change everything, but when you can change, your organization, then you absolutely should be. And I think as well, it really should be the work. It shouldn't be an addition. It shouldn't be like an add-on or a nice to have. It should be the work. And I think organizations can really transform when they embrace it. But yeah, I know it's hard. It is a journey. It never ends. And, rest to anyone doing this work, practitioners out there, really rest is something I'm trying to think about and focus on, because it's very hard to switch off because it feels so important, and it is important, and it's very hard to be like, okay, I've done my bit for today, gonna switch off now.
No, definitely. Brilliant. And I love that. And like you said, he wasn't even, is what you, and I think that is the thing that people are afraid of. And we work with lots of different organisations. And the thing you mentioned about, is it fear of not knowing? Is it fear of challenge? And I think if I can guarantee you in any sort of work that we do in education, supporting people, the thing they always want to know how to do better is how to speak up, how to challenge, how to manage that conversation. I'm telling you now, if flipping people knew how to do that, we'd be a lot further on, because people need to listen. We're all going to make mistakes, and none of us are perfect. But if you even do that, even if the one thing you do is actually speak up for somebody and learn how to have those conversations and learn to come out of your comfort zone and have those difficult conversations, oh God, we'll be in a lot better place, wouldn't we? I love that. And I might steal that, actually, Elise. I love that. What are you afraid of? It's true. And what we're afraid because it easily often be resolved through some really open discussions and opening, without fear and psychological safety. Just what is it you're afraid of? What don't you? And I love that. I think that's a really good way of saying it to people. So everybody out there who doesn't want to make change, think about that. What are you afraid of? And we're moving towards the end of this now, but just to say that, what would be your call to action? Anybody listening to this, and what would you think? Look, what would you like everybody listening to hear after this? What is the one thing you would ask them to do, or a couple of things you'd ask them to do?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. Just because you've reminded me of something there about psychological safety, and I think that, again, yeah, I've been doing this only for 4 years. I know people have been doing this for longer, but from my sort of learning, I would say that you have to have that safe space to be able to do this work. And if you don't have a safe space, that should be your first, and that should be the work to begin with, because otherwise you can cause more harm. And I think sometimes people go straight to like, well, we're just going to recruit more diverse people, fixed. And it's like, no. Like that can create more harm too. So I think, yeah, it's about creating that space where staff can speak up, like you said, without fear of retribution, and having knowing where to go and who to go to. So, at Possible, we have union reps, we've got myself, we've got directors, we've got line managers, we've got the caucus spaces. So it feels like there's something for everyone. We also have like a monthly pulse survey, so you can write anything in there. We have an annual staff experience survey. So we have lots of avenues where you can capture things. We also did work on creating an accountability framework and feedback culture. So we, as a team, worked on this accountability framework, which shows, where are we setting expectations? What happens if someone isn't following that? And what happens if they need more intervention? And then the feedback culture, where we've had lots of training on giving and receiving feedback. And I think why that is so important in this work is because, one of the things I really love to see at my organization is when someone has been, called out or called in, and they can receive that, not defensively, but from a place of where they do go and reflect. And then they come back. I think that is where you want to get to, right? A place where people can speak up. If they do speak up, people aren't defensive. They're reflecting and learning, growing and changing. So that would be my call to action, is reflection, learning, unlearning, growing, resting. And also you can read our report on our website as well, because all of this is in there.
Lovely. So where can they go for that report? Where, if you go to the website?
That is wearepossible.org. And if you go to the anti-oppression section on there, you'll find it.
Perfect. Well, listen, Elise, I've actually thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. I hope people will really take this on board and do that next layer of, really breaking down. And I love the fact about, and like you said, we need to put like an A with a capital A, accountability. And that's everything when it comes to inclusion. where's the accountability? I was having a conversation about this more recently with somebody. So really, all these things you've had, anybody listening and want to go to that anti-oppression, do more anti-oppression work, there's lots you can take from this and start that conversation. So thank you so much, Elise. It's been great. Let's get you on another time. We'll probably talk about another topic. Who knows? But thanks, everyone. This has been absolutely fabulous to have you here. And thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.